Now recognize Representative Robbins for her opening statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. Thank you for inviting us to testify. As chair of the Fraud Prevention Committee in Minnesota, I've been working to uncover the massive fraud under Tim Walz, propose solutions, and hold state agencies accountable. Today, I will highlight the scale of the problem, outline the work our committee is doing to fight the fraud, and provide a roadmap for other states on how to detect and stop fraud. Minnesota is one of the highest tax states in the nation, and hardworking Minnesotans have been told that they don't pay their fair share for years. In truth, Minnesotans pay much more in taxes than in other states, and when they pay their taxes, they expect that their money is going to things that help our communities: roads, schools, healthcare, and law enforcement. They do not want their tax dollars absconded by criminals to buy resorts and apartment buildings in Kenya, property in Turkey, and luxury homes and cars in the U.S. Tim Walz and his administration have willfully turned a blind eye to crime in the face of countless whistleblower and auditor reports, as well as stories by local investigative journalists and the Center of the American Experiment. These are actual crimes that must be punished. They are crimes against our moral values and erode trust in government. The time for accountability and justice is here. First, we are unearthing staggering amounts of fraud in Minnesota. As far back as 2014, there were credible whistleblower allegations of millions in daycare fraud. Instead of shutting it down, the state minimized whistleblower reports and allowed fraud to grow. Unfortunately, childcare fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. Since 2019, Tim Walz and Minnesota Democrats have allowed fraud to absolutely explode in Minnesota. There's been more than $300 million in the Feeding Our Future child nutrition program scandal, and the Feeding Our Future prosecutions revealed that as many as half of those indicted also ran other Medicaid-funded programs. Yet despite this being known back in 2023, Tim Walz and his agencies have done nothing to stop those defendants from getting additional state money. We have now found fraud in multiple Medicaid programs, including autism centers, sober homes, non-emergency medical transportation, integrated community supports, and housing stabilization. Just last month, our committee held a hearing on credible allegations of fraud in two new areas: adult day services and assisted living. First U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, the leading prosecutor in these cases from the Biden administration and the Trump administration, says the fraud could be an astronomical $9 billion. In the face of mounting reports and literal criminal indictments and convictions, the Walz administration has repeatedly and publicly denied or downplayed the fraud. Just last January, the commissioner of DHS, Jody Harpstead, who'd been on the job for 5.5 years, said, "There's a lot more rumors of fraud than there is actual fraud." You cannot make this up. The Walz administration has been gaslighting Minnesotans on the scale of the fraud problem for years. In response, when Republicans took control or ended Democrat control of the Minnesota House last year, we created the Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee. Since last February, we have held 15 hearings where we have grilled officials, exposed new areas of fraud, and repeatedly flagged failures in internal controls. I authored a new law to expand whistleblower protection, and we created a portal, mnfraud.com, resulting in a surge of new whistleblower reports that our amazing staff is still working through. Under the leadership of our Vice Chair, Patty Anderson, we passed a bipartisan bill in the Senate to create an independent Office of Inspector General. When it got to the House, Democrats killed it because the DHS commissioner testified against it. The Tim Walz administration has utterly failed to protect Minnesota taxpayers and vulnerable citizens, ignoring years of credible reports and retaliating against those who spoke up, often by claiming they were racist or Islamophobic. Tim Walz and the Democrats have repeatedly protected their political base at the expense of all Minnesotans. Other states should learn from the failures of the Walz administration, so I'll give you a quick roadmap on how to find and stop fraud. First, culture matters. Fraud flourishes when leaders ignore it and criminals see they can get away with it. Second, fraud flourishes when basic internal controls are not followed. This is not complicated. Third, you have to look at the interconnections of relationships in businesses in multiple program areas in Medicaid. It's a huge red flag that has been ignored in our state. Finally, it is important to say what is true and to stand up against fake allegations of racism or Islamophobia. Crime is crime, no matter who is committing it. It is true that the majority of the fraud in Minnesota has taken place in the Somali community. And it is also true that some of our best whistleblowers are from the Somali community. Democrats refuse to acknowledge this truth, and that has enabled criminals to steal billions and hurt our vulnerable citizens. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to share the lessons from Minnesota and for your help in investigating these crimes. The time for justice and accountability is now.
I now recognize Representative Hudson for his opening statement.
Chairman, ranking member, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today for the record. I am Minnesota State Representative Walter Hudson, a second-term member who sits on our House Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee. The recent national conversation about fraud in Minnesota has been fraught with distractions, diverting from critical concerns regarding process, policy, and oversight to sideshow concerns about personalities and partisan politics. My role here today is to cut through all of that and provide you with a clear picture of a culture which has developed over many years around the several generous benefit programs which Minnesota provides to our residents. Well-documented oversight failures have led to a lack of program integrity, creating incentives for people to monetize programs beyond their legislative intent to turn benefits into business. Contrary to the claim just made by the ranking member that there is no evidence of this fraud, attached to my written testimony, you will find a document which collates several reports made over the past 15 years by Minnesota's nonpartisan Office of Legislative Auditor, along with transcripts of each of our hearings from the Fraud Committee, where we heard directly from staff and leaders within the state agencies which administer these programs. Here's what that record indicates. Within the state of Minnesota, government oversight has been unable to keep up with program expansion due to a combination of factors. One, rapid expansion of funding and provider participation. Two, payment systems that prioritize access and speed. Three, verification mechanisms that occur after funds are distributed. Four, oversight capacity that does not scale with spending. And five, diffuse accountability across agencies and contractors. This combination of factors has fostered a booming new sector of the economy that relies upon the continuation of and expansion of government programs to fuel private sector profits. I want to be clear. Even when the law is being followed precisely by every jot and tittle, incentives still exist to abuse these programs and waste taxpayer dollars by diverting funding to profit centers rather than providing a safety net for those in temporary need. Now, criminal fraud is rampant. Deputy U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, serving the District of Minnesota, has said that he could keep 1,000 prosecutors busy, but he's limited to a mere 25, only 5 of which are tasked with building fraud cases. He estimates that the total amount of criminal fraud over 5 years may reach $9 billion, which is fully 1/2 of the money that has been directed to these programs by the state. While Governor Tim Walz and other stakeholders dispute that assessment, the point I wish to emphasize is this. Whatever the actual number is, the full scope of the problem is not just criminal fraud, but a culture of profiting from government programs in perpetuity, not as a safety net, but as an industry. I've personally met and had discussions with folks who identify themselves as consultants for multiple entities accepting government benefits. They have made a career out of showing people how to leverage the gaps in government oversight to maximize benefit payments. Now, such conduct may not actually break the law, and that's the point. We have a system whereby an entire industry can operate under the color of law, raking in tremendous profits for individuals, all while having no incentive to save the taxpayer money or lift legitimate beneficiaries out of need. Instead, as the market for funneling benefits into businesses increases, so too does the perceived need for benevolent services. If nothing changes, if oversight is not tightened, If incentives are not changed, spending on these programs will only continue to increase with no commensurate increase in either public good or public confidence in our governing institutions. Thank you for the opportunity to submit this testimony for the record. I look forward to answering what questions I can.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Rarick for her opening statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. For the record, my name is Marion Rarick, and I am currently serving in the Minnesota House of Representatives in House District 29B. I am a member on the Minnesota House Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee, which was recently formed in January of 25. I was first asked to serve on the committee on January 4th, and soon after, the 5 Republican members began to meet. During one of those discussions, I was asked to reach out to the Department of Human Services whistleblowers on X, now called Minnesota Staff Fraud Reporting Commentary. I had been following them in the previous year. I reached out through a direct tweet on X on January 16th, and the very same day I got a response back that yes, they would be willing to speak to the Fraud Prevention Committee. Since that first contact, Chair Robbins and I and Representative Hudson have had multiple conference calls with them, and we have had one in-person meeting. At that meeting, they were both former and current employees. I've continued to message with them very often, sometimes daily, and their collective message has been completely consistent. Instead of focusing on fraudsters, DHS leadership instead focused its surveillance on employees. Since then, their expressed fear of retaliation has intensified under an avalanche of fraud in Minnesota. Their numbers have grown from 480 DHS employees, both current and former, to over 1,000 across multiple state agencies. They have told me repeatedly how grateful they are to the House Fraud Prevention Committee for focusing our attention on fraud in the state programs, using their inside information while keeping them completely protected. They have explained that they live in a constant state of fear of retaliation. One only has to look at what happened to Faye Bernstein to understand why. In a very recent Newsweek article dated December 13th of 25, Ms. Bernstein, a former compliance specialist, stated, Minnesota DHS functions in the opposite manner as you would think. Employees who suggest improvements or, heaven forbid, report fraud then face significant retaliation. The messenger is shot. In 2019, Bernstein said she alerted Minnesota DHS officials to sloppy contracting practices that were not legally compliant. But it's not what most people would even consider fraud. She says she was later escorted out of the building, faced lengthy investigation, got trespassed from all DHS owned and leased properties, and received involuntary transfer to another state agency. So she says, so today if someone asks me, should I report fraud within DHS, I say no, no, no. It is career suicide plus a whole lot more. So let's talk about that plus a whole lot more. In our face-to-face meetings with a group of whistleblowers, they revealed that retaliation now includes threats of being fired with cause, which means you do not get unemployment insurance in the state of Minnesota, being blacklisted from all state agencies, and I would note most likely our largest counties as well, which are Democrat-run. And then there was a veiled threat of the use of military intelligence against them. They later informed me that it was discovered that in some targeted employees or suspected whistleblowers' personnel files were pictures of their homes and their cars. They also described that supervisors asked them questions about their families that to them felt like a threat. One example was, we need to know where your kids go to school and where their bus stops are. I will also note that whistleblowers we spoke to described many times that DHS used surveillance programs to surveil employees' emails and chats and other communications, looking for keywords like fraud, double billing, underspending, and overpayments. One example that the whistleblowers let me know about Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. April 12th, 2024. Flanagan comes to a DHS Health and Human Services Equity Conference at the Heritage Center and Brooklyn Center. On stage, Flanagan acknowledges the X account and the fraud concerns it raised and publicly denounced the X users and called them weirdos and losers sitting in their mother's basement. This was in a public setting with hundreds of participants and elicited gasps among the crowd. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.